Welcome to this week's Candidate Voices with 5051 Savannah, the series that brings you 5-minute interviews with candidates for Georgia's 1st Congressional District U.S. House election 2026. We welcome any candidates running for this office who meet our mission of upholding the Constitution and ending executive overreach to participate. Each of our candidates receive the same question in advance and are allowed to prepare. We are here for week 5 with Joey Palimeno. Welcome, Joey.
How you
Given
doing?
the question of the week, given the recent Pentagon proposal to form a 600-troop domestic civil disturbance quick reaction force, potentially deployable nationwide with minimal state input, and the deployment of more than 800 National Guard troops in Washington, D.C. Despite historically low crime rates, how do you view the proper role of the National Guard in domestic affairs, and what safeguards would you support to balance rapid response with civil liberties and state authority?
Thanks for having me again. Awesome question. Obviously, it's one that I don't think I'd ever have to answer. I'd be living in this kind of time because governors and, of course, mayor of DC does not agree. And as you mentioned, low crime rates to me, this is all political. But so there's 54 National Guards. Every state has one. DC has them, and in the territories, they're supposed to be there to serve our communities in real times of crisis, primarily under the leadership of state governors, not as a political tool for any Democratic or Republican president. So I'm deeply concerned about the Pentagon's plan, especially since, like you said, there's going to be minimal state input. It's important to understand the federal government does have extraordinary powers in certain circumstances. The Insurrection Act of 1807, for example, can suspend the Posse Comitatus Act, allowing the president to deploy active military forces domestically in cases of invasion, rebellion, or when state authorities are unable to enforce the law. This is a serious power, and it underscores the need for strict checks and balances, and also like to review our laws. And deployment of federal forces on U.S. soil must be guided by clear rules, transparency, and accountability, not just only from Congress, but from the public as well. Protecting citizens should never be a pretext for federal overreach or the erosion of state authority. As I mentioned, we already have laws that are supposed to limit this, but at a time when we're seeing cracks in our democracy, since no others, in my time at least, and from historically since the Nixon era, it's now shown that we must fix this. The one big solution would be to grant DC statehood, but that's going to run into a situation with Republicans, obviously, because it would give Democrats 2 more senators. You can look to reform the Home Rule Act, giving DC a bit more power. You can update the Insurrection Act to require congressional approval for any domestic deployment beyond 72 hours. You can codify the Comitatus Act to prevent the Guard units from being used for routine law enforcement, protest suppression, or for political purposes like we're seeing now, and then just mandate more transparency. Like White House must notify the Congress and the public within 24 hours of any Guard deployment, including with the mission scope and the rules of engagement, and then strengthen civil liberty protections by prohibiting military intimidation tactics like we saw from Trump before, because this isn't the first time he's done that. He's actually flown helicopters very low intentionally. That was kind of a warfare tactic during peaceful protests. And as I mentioned again, DC statehood would be critical here. If the city were a state, it would gain more rights like full local governance and gain voting representation in Congress, protecting both civil liberties and democracy. And I know this isn't affecting our communities right here in Georgia, but just realize this can be done anywhere. It's, as you mentioned, DC does not have a terrible crime rate. There's worse crime rates in cities that are run by Republicans, but Trump's obviously not going to deploy them there. He's not going to deploy. He's doing this purely as a political show of force. I would highly doubt him to go into a place like Atlanta because Georgia's a battleground state. I mean, if you were to do that, that would shock me, and I would go, fight that with full force, and I expect my fellow Georgians would too. But again, to me, it's political, and it's a show of force from a strong man who wants to be a bully, and I fully intend to stand up to him. Yeah, crazy. I hope we can get to an era like past Nixon to where we can get some, bipartisan. Because after Nixon, did the whole Watergate scandal, we got bipartisan reform, rule in federal power, and it worked for a little bit. But now, like I said, those checks or those cracks are beginning to show again in our democracy. So we got to ask ourselves: are we willing to address it or not?